one of us is unique, so just recognize it and live your dream. We all look alike, but we're different breeds. See, authenticity is the key. The key to peace and a happy life, and many more things. Yeah, that is right. I would never tell you what bad advice. Wrote this cause it's what I had to write. Cause everything happens for a reason. The rain, the wind, and the four seasons. And once I noticed this fact, everything made sense and life became more decent.
Welcome to the Dealmaker Zone. My name's Stevenson and I'm your host. Our guest tonight is a former pro surfer turned CRE tech entrepreneur. His name is Nick Romito, and he's the co-founder and CEO of VTS, one of the leading platforms in the commercial real estate space. They're a leasing and asset management platform. Since launching their company 4 years ago, they've raised over $37 million and have over $2 billion worth of square footage on their platform. Some of their clients include CBRE, the Blackstone Group, Boston Properties, and SL Green. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Awesome.
So how does one go from being a professional surfer to starting a CRE tech company?
I surfed my whole life since I was a kid. I grew up on the beach. And at some point in your kind of amateur surfing career, you're in this flex area where you got to decide, am I good enough to make it, really on the pro tour, or has this been a really fun ride and it's time to figure out what I want to do with my life? And I was kind of in that zone and, went to a couple mentors of mine who were really successful businessmen and said, I'm trying to figure this out. And they said, well, you can try to do the pro thing for a long time and probably struggle. And then when you get to your mid-30s, start your life. Or you've got a pretty strong entrepreneurial spirit. You can do your own thing, become really successful, and then surf wherever you want. That sounded like the better option to me. So I literally moved to New York City like 2 months later. I'm one of those guys where once you get it in your head, you have to just kind of do it, hence VTS. And here we are. So.
Got it. So prior to VTS, you were a broker, right? For a few years, right? And you started your company with one of your childhood friends, Ryan, right?
You guys,
there you go. And you used to surf together.
Yeah, so my co-founder, Ryan, and I met when we were 10 years old. At a surfing contest.
By the way, who won?
I did win, yeah. He may tell you different, but he knows what happened. He actually got into commercial real estate a year ahead of me. So the kind of story goes, we were having dinner with our girlfriends at the time, now wives, in his backyard. And he said, I have an idea. And I said, well, I have an idea too. And it ended up being a very similar idea. And from the next, call it year, really, we spent just brainstorming what this new ecosystem would look like and what would it do and how should it look, and it turned out to work. So far, so good.
So far, so good. Now, I have a question about that. Usually, people are told if you're starting a tech startup and you have a business background, you should have a technical co-founder. In your case, you and Ryan partnered together. You had similar backgrounds. Why do you think it worked, and what advice would you give other potential entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, it only worked up to a certain point, right? We were able to build out a concept with a pretty weak kind of technology background. So before we launched, we found our third co-founder, Carl, who was our CTO. How
did you find him? I heard you have a coffee shop or something?
Yeah, I was at a deli, and I heard a bunch of guys talking at the table next to us who were clearly engineers, software engineers, and as they were trying to leave, I literally stopped them from leaving and said, I've got this great idea, we need a co-founder, someone to build this thing out, just come next door to our office and just see what I have. At that point, we had pretty significant interest from a lot of big owners to say, once this thing is really built, we're in. And I had contracts to prove it. So that kind of piqued his interest. He literally went home, quit his job, told his wife, they just had their second kid. I really believe in this thing these guys are doing, and I want to do it with them. So he quit his job. We raised money pretty much immediately after, and we're able to pay him, pay ourselves a nominal fee to, pay our rent. And the rest is kind of history.
You must be a really good salesman, because usually if you're a business guy pitching a tech person, but in this case you kind of had some leads, so that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, right? I think with all this stuff though, you have to believe in this thing or you don't, and if you don't, it's probably not worth the risk for anybody, because it's very hard. It's the hardest thing you're ever going to do.
I can totally agree. Being that I'm an entrepreneur myself.
Other than being a dad, which we both are.
Yes, and being a dad, which is true.
That's the most fun, though.
It is. And when you started initially, you put your life savings in. So can you tell us about what your wife thought about that whole process and what her thoughts?
Yeah.
Like,
no,
isn't it crazy? Why are you doing this?
No, I'm really blessed to have a wife who kind of understood that I was an entrepreneur, and that was the kind of path that was meant for me. So she said, day one, I love the idea. I think you guys are onto something huge. Whatever it takes at all costs, let's do it. So prior to us actually getting married is when we had the idea. She was my girlfriend, and we were pretty close to getting engaged. But was obviously dumping a lot of dollars into a prototype. So put most of my money into that. And my last deal as a broker, I split the fee between her engagement ring and like our last kind of fee to our developers, and then kind of like lived off of like, you know, my co-founder Ryan's dinner for a while, him and his girlfriend would cook, and fruit, until we were able to raise some more money and really start to pay ourselves something. So it is a struggle, and I think if you look at any real successful company, they tend to have that story somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, whether you read about it or not, I promise you it happened, unless you have some kind of like family wealth, which we didn't have. So it meant we just had to push a little harder, but.
Definitely. So actually tell our audience, some people might not be as familiar with VTS. What exactly is the product? How does it work? Who uses it?
Yeah, so VTS we're the #1 system in the world for leasing and asset management. So what that means are owners, whether they're big or small, their entire portfolio of commercial assets lives inside our ecosystem.
Within this office,
retail, industrial.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been heavily weighted towards office. It's where we started. Now the industrial and retail sectors are growing pretty significantly, but their entire portfolio, every single tenant, every building, every space lives in our system, and all their agents can actually use the system to report on leasing. So things like what kinds of companies and which tenants are touring through the building, if they're receiving proposals, the actual terms of those deals get put in our system, and VTS actually calculates net effective rent for you, and then it's powered by a plethora of analytics. So we're going to show you what kinds of companies are most active in your portfolio. Do you have large tenants that are potentially whose leases are expiring? To pay attention to. So it really becomes that front-end business solution for owners of real estate as well as their agents.
Got it. And when you initially started the company, was that the overall vision, or can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of the product and why it changed over time?
Yeah, we get asked that question a lot, and I think you look at most of the big tech companies, they all started looking very differently than they are today. Amazon was selling books, and now they're doing everything.
Drones and movies.
It's insane. And I think unless you build one of these businesses, it's hard to really see how that happens. But for us, our lofty goal was always to build, the real home base for commercial real estate, the platform where everybody went to run their own portfolios, to communicate, to do work. The time we had the idea was 2009, really, was when the original idea kind of happened that we want to do this. Took a couple years to get something that we could show people, but we wanted to do everything, but we couldn't. And our CTO, Carl, was the first to say, like, okay, guys, these are all really good ideas, but the reality is we got to pick one.
We got to execute on
We got to
that
pick
first.
one to start, right? Let's prove that we can build these things and get trust and loyalty from the users. At the time, the market was terrible. I mean, you're talking about we're coming out of the worst recession in the history of commercial real estate. And we said, well, if we launch with this software product that helps you track leasing and all these things, it seemed like a pretty complex product. And at that time, mobile had really no legs. There was not a ton of mobile usage, and we're a very mobile product. Two, you had a really low-tech community of users, right? They weren't using
in the commercial real estate space,
right. So we said, well, which part of this can we build that's super simple, where you don't need to be a CTO to get it in your inbox and use it? And we said, well, there's a huge problem with people identifying space that works for them. Let's build the marketing piece first, where someone can say, does that piece of space work for me because I just saw a video of it online or on my phone? If it does, I'm going to call. So we launched that product. We're the first people to really pioneer any kind of digital content in a meaningful way in the space. Did that. It got legs really quickly. We signed up most of the big owners in New York on it within a matter of months, including SL Green, as you mentioned. And that was really our foot in the door to say, all right, we just solved a really big problem for you guys. You couldn't get tenants to come see this building. Now you do. You're leasing space. But when they call you and they say, all right, I want to submit an offer to you, where does that data get stored? And they all said, well, it's getting stored in Excel or in some other spreadsheet. And we said, well, how would you feel about storing that same information in that same system where all that marketing stuff lives? And they said, 100% that makes sense. It's all the same process, right? It just depends how you look at it. So it was just the right move, the right product to launch first. And it's still a part of our ecosystem. We're going to reinvest in it this year because I think the demand for it is huge as just mobile usage increases and people want to see things from wherever they are. So.
Got it. So talk to us about the evolution of the company, right? So now you have offices in 7 markets, right?
Yeah.
And you just did your first international office in London. You have a new chief operating officer, and you have 100+ employees. What's the process of running a company at this scale versus when you started with Ryan and Carl?
Yeah, it's very different. We have a really great advisor / mentor who I think framed it out and just has a really strong analogy. It's like when you first start and you're, call it, below 30 people, you really are kind of like a family. I mean, you're spending 24 hours a day together. You're fighting. You're crying. You're happy. But once you get to a certain point, it really starts to translate more like a professional sports team, where you're spending the same amount of time, actually probably more than you are with your family at that point. But you really need everyone to perform at the top level, and they can be fired, right? At that point, you know what? If you're not performing, you go. No, the same way you would if you're on an NFL team or an NBA
So everybody
team.
has to really be good at their specific role and really execute on that specific role because the whole team relies on that person to 100%. Deliver.
You practice every day together. You got to put in the work. That's, I think, been the biggest change for us. And again, we're 100 people now. We'll probably be 200 by the end of the year, or
200 by the end. So
somewhere in that realm, yeah.
Wow. So that kind of leads us to my next question. Are you thinking of raising additional capital, or is it mostly organic growth?
You're always thinking about it, right? I mean, and that's another thing that most entrepreneurs needed to figure out early on is, and there's really no right or wrong way to grow a business. There are some companies who choose to say, well, you know what, I'd rather suffer less dilution and grow slower and make it more organic. So grow revenue at a slower pace versus, you know what, this is more of a land grab for us. Let's blow the team out, get a lot of really great people, increase sales, and do it that way. So meaning I'm willing to sacrifice some burn versus lower headcount and more sales.
So for you, VTS, a successful company, means you guys IPO'd, you guys were acquired by a larger company. What does success look like for VTS?
In terms of exit, it's a hard one to answer. People ask us all the time, would you sell the company for this much money? And we always say no. We know how big the opportunity is, and when you're having this much fun, like the thought of not working there is a horrible one. Obviously, at some point, there has to be liquidation via an IPO or through an acquisition. But at this point, our focus is growing a really awesome big business that changes the whole industry. That's what we want to do, and we're on our way. We're seeing it happen already.
So talk to us about that. So the money part of it, IPO, it's kind of hard to define, but in terms of what you want to do from a business standpoint, right? So what is VTS at maximum scale, or your grand vision? You and Ryan, what's your grand vision for VTS? Do you want to be the hub for all things commercial real estate and do more than what you're currently doing? Like, what do you have in mind? What are the next things that you guys are working on?
Yeah, I think if you want to be the ecosystem, that means a lot of different things to probably a lot of people. The platform itself is very transaction focused, right? So we tend to be on the front side of a deal. So people are tracking things like leasing velocity, asset management as it pertains to leasing, portfolio management. So how is this group of buildings or this fund really performing compared to that one that I own? So I think
and
how
are they able to do that through your product, right? What's the process? So if my buildings are fully leased, why do I use your product?
Great question.
What's the added value to?
So we're connected to your property management system. So
like Yardi?
Yeah, Yardi or MRI or JD Edwards. So all those kind of dispersed systems are all connected to VTS. So we're now that one central repository of all that data, right? And it's powered by analytics and collaboration tools. So even if your building's fully leased, you can see, well, these 10 tenants are expiring over the next 5 years. Here's what they're paying. Here's how it compares to market, right? Should we renew early? In addition to that, we just formed a partnership with S&P Capital IQ, which we actually announced today, which means you've got 4.85 million companies, their revenue, net income, debt, operations. So we can take all that outside data and apply it to your portfolio to say, you know what? One, you've got a ton of overlapping relationships within your tenant base. But two, for tenants that are also in your pipeline, here's what you should know about their financials. are they really the right tenant for this space? Because tenant B has much stronger financials. So now you're doing things that you couldn't normally do without VTS. And that's the direction we've always wanted to go. But you've got to build a foundation before you build a house.
Which does make a lot of sense. Now, in the CRE tech space, a lot of your peer companies kind of view you guys as the leaders, right? You've done quite well. There's another company in the space that has a similar product, but you have more in terms of the business, right? What do you think makes your company so successful in terms of the DNA of your company? For example, Peter Thiel, when he started PayPal, he had this thing where he said he only hired people who liked Star Wars, right? He didn't want anybody who liked Star Trek, right? And it's a true story, right? So for him, it was really about the culture. So for you, what is it that you look for in the people that you hire to work at VTS?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think there's probably a lot of things that we look for. I don't know if there's ever a silver bullet, right? I don't know if Star Wars was his silver. Maybe it turned out pretty well for him, so maybe I should find, are you a Talladega Nights fan or something?
I just thought it was interesting, right? He was adamant that, no, they were if you like Star Trek, they can't work with you.
Yeah, people always think that ours is do you surf or do you snowboard?
No, there you go, you surf.
Or
right?
MMA, we have all these kind of quirky things that I think are pretty unique to our culture. But I think it's, for me, our interview process is really hard. It's not your standard. You meet almost everyone in the company, certainly every manager, but and it's a really kind of collaborative vote as to, does this person have what it takes to be here? Because we expect more than you probably have, right? And I think if you look at people like Steve Jobs, and we never compare our process to him because he was an aggressive guy, but I mean, hey, I love that he always said, whatever you think you can do, I'm going to expect probably 10x that, right? And I think you have to do that, because when you do that, you get so much more out of people than they probably would normally give, and don't even realize they can do it. So we make that a part of our process, and we're really vocal about it, and saying that this is going to be the hardest job you've ever had. You will have the most fun you've ever had in your life. But you have to know that if you want a 9-to-5 job, this is not it, right? We may work weekends, we may work till midnight, but guess what? You have the best time you've ever had in your life. And you get to change the world's second biggest asset class. I think when you look in someone's eyes and you say that, you know pretty quickly whether or not they're the right fit.
For the challenge,
yeah,
right?
And that's before you've done all your kind of other digging and research on kind of what they do. Are they really great at it? Because it is something that you've got to decide as a person, is this a sacrifice that I want to make? Because it is. You're going to see your family less, potentially, and changing the world's not easy.
No, it's not. So how would you describe yourself as a leader and a manager?
I think, because me and my co-founders are all really tight, we all kind of play a lot of roles. I think I'm probably the guy who flies the highest. I tend to stay at 35, 40,000 feet. My co-founder Ryan's probably more like 5,000 to 10,000 feet. So, he's good at kind of reining me in. I'm good at kind of pushing him out sometimes.
So it's a good balance there.
Really good balance. And then Carl, our other co-founder and CTO, is, he is amazing at what he does and just creating a community within the company, right? So he thinks about technology as something that we should all be aware of and care about. It's not just this thing that powers our platform. And that's a big part of our DNA. So we do things like the kind of Ruby on Rails hacker hours is run out of our office every week, where he's literally coaching 35 engineers about products they want to build or companies they want to build. So that's a big part of our culture, is that, we want you to come here to work really hard, to learn, to teach others how to do things better. And it creates a really unique environment.
So VTS is a tech company solving a real estate problem, or is VTS a real estate company using technology to solve a problem?
First and foremost, we're a technology company.
So people who work for you, for VTS, have to really love technology, want to be involved in tech in some capacity, and they can learn real estate then, or is it a little bit?
No, I think it depends on what side of the business you're on. From a sales perspective, we've got a lot of really successful brokers who left their jobs to work for us. These are guys who, again, want to emphasize we're really successful as a broker, which is probably one of the hardest jobs in the world, right? The business, it's super grueling. You're not getting an hourly paycheck. You work, what you kill is what you eat.
Pretty much.
That's exactly right. So I think those guys having the background is amazing because they can speak so well to the problem that the technology solves. But on the inverse of that, the technology guys, I think because our tech team is so intelligent, most of them could probably be a pretty decent asset manager at this point. Like they understand the problem so well, and they've kind of become obsessed with it. And we also put them in the room with our clients all the time. We've got the top institutional landlords in the world, right, and brokers who live on our system. The amount of time they spend with our account management, customer success, and engineers would blow your mind. These guys are excited to help us build this thing, which is a really unique place to be. So the engineers kind of feed off of that and really start to understand the business, and their just natural mindset is they want to solve huge problems. That is all they thrive on, right? It's actually, they care more about that than probably money and equity. It's just, this has to be a really interesting problem. And if it is, I'm going to dive in head first. So.
That's great. Actually, I was reading an article the other day about Mark Zuckerberg, right? His 2016 resolution is to use artificial intelligence to wire his whole house, kind of like Jarvis and Iron Man. What are your thoughts on that? He's a big proponent of artificial intelligence, and Elon Musk thinks it's evil and the machines are going to take over. Yeah. So kind of what's your thought on artificial intelligence?
You know what? I'm actually really excited about things like self-driving cars, and I think it's just, we all know it's happening. So I think on a lot of that, I'm on the fence in terms of how far it can go. The self-driving car thing, I'm a huge proponent. I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to, lower things like drunk driving and all the deaths associated with that. So I think if I had to pick a vote, yes or no, I think I'm probably on board.
Got it. And the reason I use artificial intelligence as an example is how do you think that can be applied to real estate, for example? Are there some areas that you think would make sense, and would VTS at some point integrate that into its products?
I think so. I think we use it there's a couple cool startups that are doing it for executive assistants, right? They actually do all your scheduling, they reply to emails, and I've fallen for it a few times where I actually reply with a really nice message to the assistant, and I realized that, wow, that was a machine, that it wasn't an actual person named Mary that responded to me. I think doing things like scheduling, I think a big part of commercial real estate is actually showing space, and having that whole process be automated by putting in codes to doors opening and seeing space and leaving in the close. I mean, there's kind of endless ways you can really apply it to our space. Any space that's a super physical manual thing, I think you'll start to see some substitutes, but time will tell, right?
Definitely. So over the past few years, there are a lot of companies that have kind of got into the CRE tech space. They've raised a lot of capital. Let's say you were the CEO of CoStar, which historically they were the only CRE tech company, right? And now suddenly they have all these competitors. If you were running CoStar, just hypothetically, what would your approach be?
I'd be really rich.
You'd be really rich. That's true. What would your approach be to all these new players? Would you view them as threats to your business? So in that case, if you see a company that has some traction, you buy them out. Do you compete with them, or do you just focus on improving your own product? How would you kind of?
Yeah, I think we're in a pretty unique space, right? Where you've got one company who, for lack of a better word, has a monopoly on the space, and they're really the only place to go for listings. I mean, they do a lot of things, but that's really the only reason anyone uses it, is to see what's available in a given market. I think their approach is, we're so big we don't really care about anyone else. I think they certainly pay attention, but not because they're scared. I think they just think that they're too big and it's going to take someone a long time to catch up. I would have the inverse of that if I were them. I think the world has changed a lot since they started their business. Technology can be built way faster, right?
That's
when they started, it took 5 years and millions of dollars to build any
basic
kind of application. Right? Now it's free, and it takes a couple days. And also the speed at which these things are getting adopted is insanely faster. So I think if I were them, I'd pay probably more attention. But I'm just a startup guy, so what do I know?
So you guys are quite successful so far. What do you still have the edge and the hustle and the drive that you had when you were starting off? And how do you? If you still do, how do you keep that going? Yeah,
I mean, we I don't think we've ever been more driven than we are now, right? When you actually have resources to do the things that you've always wanted to do, it's you can't run fast enough. We eat, drink, and sleep this thing, and we work 7 days a week, the weekends, not because we have to, but because we're so excited about what we're doing. And now you've got hundreds of the people feeling that way, right? It's not just me, Ryan, and Carl. it's 100 and something people who are all kind of have that same drive and energy to build this ecosystem. And VTS is turning into this monster, right? And it's I think this quarter is kind of our breakout quarter. We're releasing more products than we ever have. These are new products that are really starting to put the pieces together for the entire user base. So you'll see a lot of that.
That's pretty cool. We're almost out of time. Is there anything else you want to share with the audience?
No, I think it's just exciting for us to have guys like you, creating these formats for us to talk about our products and shed a lot of light on what's happening out there. So thank you for doing this, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on the show, Nick.
Yeah. Cheers, buddy.
This is our show. If you want to be on the Dealmaker Zone, please send us an email at show@AnySizeDeals.com. Oh, I almost forgot to learn more about VTS. You can go to VTS.com, and that's the last word. Thank you.
No matter how you choose to live, be yourself. 'Cause your authenticity is a gift.